but we'll record and post it for students later. All right, so I was able to fix the video I was talking about, and hopefully you're going to be able to hear it. So this video is a nice demonstration of the principles that we've been talking about. So I'm going to share my screen. Now let me see if I can figure this out. I'm going to put it in full screen mode. All right. Text me or chat me if you can't hear it. I'm going to play a bit of it and then we'll pause and then we'll keep going. So these guys are playing that Golden Balls game, and it is very much a prisoner's dilemma, which is the game we've been working on. As of last time. So I'm going to play for a bit and then we'll talk about it.
Welcome back to Golden Balls. After a run of big cash balls, Ibrahim and Nick now have £13,600 in front of them. We know they've got it, but the golden question is, can they keep it? Ibrahim and Nick, you now face a very straightforward choice, but it's a choice that could make one or both of you extra wealthy, but it could also lose both of you everything that you have fought for today. They have to decide to split or steal. Ibrahim, Nick.
The audio is kind of cut off. We can't hear it.
Because you can have a look.
You hear now?
If you both pick,
yeah, we're here now.
You split the 13,600 and you go home with 6,800 each. If one of you chooses the steal ball and the other chooses the split ball, whoever chooses the steal ball goes home with the whole lot, 13,600. But if you both choose the steal ball, you leave today's game with what you came with, nothing. It's the ultimate test of faith, trust, and let's face it, greed. Take a moment to look at the balls in front of you so you know for definite which is split and which is steal, but obviously keep them concealed from each other. Just have a look. Okay. It's the easiest choice, but the most difficult one. What I want you to do is to spend half a minute talking to each other about what you both should do. Nick, Ibrahim.
All right. So barring that initial, we had a little break, but did hear most of it? Got the setup?
Yeah, we heard it.
Okay. So let me flip my camera. So let's review. So last time I talked about, let's see, is that coming in? That's pretty focused, right? You can read that. I mean, aside from my messy handwriting. So last time I set this up, I told you, I was telling you about the video. So we have Nick, right, who's the guy in the brown shirt on the right, right? Nick can steal or split, but he can only choose his own action of stealing or splitting. The ultimate outcomes depend on what Abraham, who's the guy in the blue shirt on the left, also chooses, right? So Abraham can only steal or split, but they can't independently choose which of the four cells they're going to be in. All they can choose, so Abraham can choose to be in this row or this row. Nick can choose to be in this column or this column, but they can't pick the actual final outcome. So as they make their decision, you know, so Nick is going to be, the outcomes are going to be in red for Nick, right? So the way that we typically set up this game, and we call it a game, but the way we set up this chart, right, is the player on the left gets the left outcomes, right? And the player on top gets the right outcomes. So if Nick chooses to go into the steal column, he's either going to get 0 or 13.6. If he chooses to go into the split column, he's either going to get 0 or 68. If Abraham chooses to go into the steal row, he's either going to get 0 or 13.6. And if he chooses to go into the split row, he's either going to get 0 or 68. So when you are trying to solve these to find if there is a dominant strategy, right? So each of these choices is called a strategy in game theory, right? So Abraham can choose between a steal strategy or the split strategy, and likewise Nick can as well. If Abraham chooses to go with the steal strategy, he's either going to get 0 or 13.6, right? So he's black, 0 or 13.6. So we want to compare the outcomes vertically for Abraham. So we compare 0 and 0. Okay, I'm indifferent between 0 or 0. Don't matter. Doesn't matter, right? But over here, 13.6 versus 68, that's actually a better outcome for me. Better outcome for me, considering that I can't control what Nick is going to do. So I would rather steal, because ignoring what Nick is going to do, or not knowing what Nick is going to do, I'm either going to get 0 or 13.6 or 0 or 68. This is actually a better strategy for Abraham than split is. Stealing is a better strategy for Abraham than splitting is, given that he doesn't know what Nick is going to do. Now, the problem is Nick also has the same setup, right? So Nick can either choose steal or split. So now we're going to compare horizontally for Nick. So Nick's comparing between steal, 0 and 0, or steal and split here, and 13.6 and 68 here. So he's better off with this strategy because the outcomes dominate these outcomes, right? 0 and 0, you're indifferent. 13.6 and 68, you're better off. So the problem with this setup is the dominant strategy for Nick is to steal, and the dominant strategy for Abraham is also to steal. And if they both choose steal, then they wind up in the worst possible cell, right? Which is the steal cell, where they both wind up losing everything. Now, it's not an ideal outcome for either one of them to be in this category, right? Really, Abraham would like to be in this category where he gets all the money, and Nick would like to be in this category where he gets all the money. But that's, given the dominant strategies, that's that is an unlikely outcome to have happen. And so the best possible the best outcome that they could arrange, if they could convince each other, would be to get to the split. And that's the challenge. How do we go from playing our dominant strategies of steal and everybody loses, to getting to our the outcome that is mutually beneficial but hard to get to because of a lack of trust? So what the game show host has just told them before I paused was talk to each other for a minute. Now, I said that is, they're going to talk to each other, and we talked about this last time. They can't make a binding contract in this situation because it's a game. They're actually encouraged in a way to lie to each other. And so what they're going to engage in is called cheap talk, right? Which means that you can say whatever you want, but it's not necessarily going to, it's not binding in the sense that this isn't a contract that can be enforced. You can't take it, you can't, if Abraham promised to split with Nick, and then he changed his mind, no judge would no judge would say, hey, you made a binding promise. This is, judge would say it was a game show. Part of the game is to lie to each other. Like, no, it doesn't count. Um, now, that said, if you were in the real world and you made a promise of this sort, depending on the situation, it could be considered binding, even if you don't have a written contract, right? But in a game show, for sure, any promise that you make in this circumstance, anybody outside would say it's a game, right? Everybody knows that part of the game is you try to cheat if you can. So they would. So what they're going to do now, and I'm going to start the video again. What they'll do now is they were going to engage in a brief communication, and this is the fun part for me. So let me switch to it. I'll let them talk, and then we'll pause again. So let me share my screen, and here we go.
Abraham, I want you to trust me. 100%, I'm going to pick the steel ball.
Sorry, you're going to...
I'm going to choose the steel ball.
You're going to take the
I
steel.
want you to do split, and I promise you that I will split the money with you.
Well, after you've took the steel.
Yeah.
You're going to take steel.
Yeah.
I'm going to take split.
Yeah.
So you take the money.
And I will split it with you.
After the show.
Yeah. Abraham, I promise you I'll do that. If you do steal, we both walk away with nothing. I'm telling you 100% I'm going to do it.
I appreciate that. Right, I'll give you another alternative. Why don't we just both pick split?
I'm not going to pick split. I'm going to steal. Abraham, honestly, 100% I'm going to steal.
It's in your nature to steal.
No, I'm honest, and I'm going to tell you.
You're an honest
I am. That's why I'm telling you I'm going to steal. If you do split, then I will split the money.
I can't see myself doing that.
Okay, well, I'm going to steal, so we're going to leave with nothing.
Where's your brains coming from? I can't work out.
I know that I'm a decent guy, and I will split the money with you.
Well, we should just both split then.
No, I'm going to do steal.
There is no legal
I know there
requirement
is. I know there
for
is.
him to give you the money.
Of course. If I gave you my word, now let me tell you what my word means.
Okay.
My father once said to me, a man who doesn't keep his word is not a man. He's not worth nothing. Not worth a dollar.
I agree.
So,
Abraham, I'm going to steal. So you've got the choice. You either steal, and we both walk away with nothing. Because I've told you my intention, and I've told you that I will split the money with you, Abraham.
if I gave you my word that I was going to split, I would split. And you're going to take steal. So,
the only way you can guarantee to walk away with 6,800
it's by
is to
sharing.
guarantee that you both put the split ball in. And I do now have to push you for a decision. It's a tough one.
We've lost it. We've lost everything.
Okay. Class then.
We're walking away with no money because you're an idiot.
No, that's
You're
not
an
true.
idiot. You're an idiot. That's what you are. You're an idiot. You're an idiot. That's what you are.
This can go on all night, and these people have got to get up for breakfast. Nick, choose split or steal. Abraham, choose split or steal. Now, please. Choose a ball.
All right. So could everybody hear, or was I just sitting there grinning by myself?
No, we can hear.
Okay. So Andre, I think you actually proposed exactly what Nick just proposed last time. So have you seen this video before, just out of curiosity?
No, I've never seen it.
All right. So you came up with that potential solution. So, so Nick is proposing, let's remember here, right? So Nick is proposing that Abraham chooses split and Nick will choose steal. Nick will get the 13,600, and then after the show is over, he'll give Abraham half of the money. Now, why is that? And the audience is laughing, right? Why is the audience laughing?
Because they think he's stupid for not just calling split and get the money right off the bat.
And why is it? But you're right. So that's and that's what Abraham is saying is, look, I'm an honest guy. If I give you my word, I will. I really will follow through. I'm not. My father talked about it. I've given a good word and blah blah blah. So why is it that it's more believable that, or is it more believable? I mean, that's that. Is it more believable that Nick will actually do this after the fact? What do you think?
The guy saying he's gonna steal?
Yeah.
I don't think so. He seems like a sketchy guy by the way he talks.
So he seems sketchy. So would you split? So Andre, would you split, or would, if you were Abraham, would you be like, fine, I'll split, and I'll hope that you give me the money afterwards?
No, I'd steal because one way or the other, I'd lose. I'd get zero money anyway.
So would you rather? So you'd get zero money either way. So you're going to go with the. Let me see. You're Abraham. So you would go with your dominant solution, which is to steal. But he's saying that I'll give it to you after the fact, but you're still going to steal anyway. Why is that? Like he's saying 100% I'm going to steal. Now, is that a believable statement? 100% I'm going to steal?
Could be a lie.
What is it? Sorry?
It could be a lie. You could just
It could be a lie. He could really be planning to split.
Yeah.
Is that likely?
I guess depends on how they're talking, their eye movements. I'm curious to know, in this game, are you allowed to do like handshakes as a form of, some kind of contract to solidify the fact that you'd split it afterwards, or no?
So I think actually the host during that conversation, and you may not have been able to hear it, the host actually said there's no binding contract here. Whatever you say, there's no like legal way to enforce that. So it purely would be, I mean, a handshake is, and really a handshake is no more binding than a verbal statement anyway, right?
Yeah.
Anybody else? What do you think, Jisoo?
I can't get my what was the question again?
All right. What would you do? Do you think this is a reasonable outcome? Do you think so? Nick has proposed this strategy. Is he believable?
I don't know. He doesn't seem believable, but I mean, and personally, I'll take any option that would at least give me any money. If somebody offered me $1 and somebody else got $1 million, but if I said no, if none of us get any money, like that's pointless. Like I'd rather get $1 than no dollar. So it's just any option that would just get me the money, I'll choose it.
But if you choose split and he chooses steal, you get zero and he gets all of the money. And he's saying, hey, choose split and I'll get all the money and then I'll give it to you after the fact.
I feel like he's just playing mind games. I feel like he's saying I'm gonna steal and secretly like hope that like the guy would say split and then he's gonna say split at the same time, because I feel like the other guy is worried about the other dude saying steal, so both get nothing. But if the guy lies to him and says I'm gonna steal but then chooses split, they both get 6,800. So
you're fucked.
does that make sense?
Yeah.
I like Jisoo's logic. That makes sense to me too, Jisoo.
Thank you.
All right. So let's see what happens. Hold on.
I'll tell you what.
Let me, sorry, I didn't share my screen. There we go.
Choosable.
Right, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go with you.
Okay.
I'm going to go with
I promise you I will split it.
You cannot change your balls now. Split or steal? Yes, congratulations, you have both split and each received £6,800. Well, it's charity all the way. And a market.
Now they're shaking hands. Good. All right. So was that expected? That surprised you guys?
I think it was kind of expected. I feel like we wanted to put him in a sense of fear and then go split to be on the safe side.
So he could have, I mean, okay. Well, you came up with the solution. So I have to say, Andre, I've showed this at least 7 or 8 times, and you're the first person ever to say, hey, that could be a solution before I even showed it. So good for you. Anybody else surprised or not surprised? What do you think? Everybody's shell shocked from the finance exam.
I feel like if Nick could guarantee that Aaron or whatever his name is could have split, then that's why he would have chose to split. Like he wanted to ensure that he would have been choosing the option that they both would get money. If that makes sense.
Try to use.
Oh, sorry. Trying to get rid of this. Uh, if he could have guaranteed it,
Like by Nick saying, I'm going to pick steal, you pick split. Like I promise I'll split it with you.
right?
I promise we'll split. Like by him making sure like that Aaron, I don't know his name. Abraham. Okay. He picked split, then he just instantly went to go split it as well.
Right. So, and that's the problem with the prisoner's dilemma, which is the setup we have here with a simultaneous game, where these guys are playing, like I said last time, they're playing one time, right? And they're most likely never going to see each other again. So you have this one-off game where, you could say stuff like, I promise I'll do this or that, my word is my bond, blah, blah, blah. And it really becomes just kind of blah, 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 because you're never going to see each other again. Right. So would it be more believable if Nick and Abraham were neighbors or business partners, and they were going to have to play this game again tomorrow? How would that change your logic? How do you think that would change the outcome? So same game, right? Either one of them could choose steal and take all the money, but tomorrow you're going to play the same game again with the same partner.
If you were neighbors and you knew the person, I feel like they both would just automatically say, let's split it. Like, why not just go along with that agreement that ensures that we'll both get the money?
Right. And why?
Because they know each other and they know where each other live. So, like, they hate each other otherwise.
Right. So they've got, if they're neighbors or if they're business partners and they have to keep playing this game, let's say they have to keep playing this game day after day after day, right? Then they're going to see each other again, right? And so if you and I are playing this game and today I cheat and then now it's time to play and I get all the money, tomorrow we have to play again and I'm like, oh, yesterday was different, today it's going to be today I'm going to don't worry, Ariana, I'm going to split with you. That was Ariana talking, right?
Yeah, it was. Hi.
Okay. So what do you think? Are you
I wouldn't believe you. You already tricked me once.
Right?
So I don't know. That time, I guess I would steal and hopefully you would split.
And you could make it up. I could make it up to you, or
Exactly.
you'd get all the money. Okay, so tomorrow, so on day 2, you steal and I split, because I feel bad about what I did yesterday. So you wind up. Let's say you wind up getting all the money. Day 3, we're back at it again.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Tricky.
So the argument here with prisoner's dilemma, the problem with prisoner's dilemma is we're not neighbors, we're not business partners. And so with the game show like this, you know that at the end of the game, you're never going to play again. And so there's a pretty high incentive to go with your dominant strategy, which was to steal for both players, right? It just happened that the both players, you know, were actually pretty honest dudes, though Nick, I thought Nick had a pretty clever strategy, which was to convince Abraham that he was going to go with his dominant strategy. I mean, it's not that hard to convince somebody that you're going to do the thing that people would think you were going to do. It's harder to convince somebody that you're going to go with the thing that runs against your interests. So it was relatively easy for Nick to, relatively easy for Nick. It was believable. What Nick said he was going to do was believable. He said, I'm going to steal. Of course, he was lying, but he said, I'm going to steal. So it's when you, even though it was cheap talk, it was believable because it was in his interest based on the game, right? And Abraham kind of went with what Jisoo said, which, well, I'll go ahead and split. At least it gives me a chance of getting something. Maybe you're not lying. Maybe you will share with me after the fact. Nick really was lying. He was lying that he was going to steal. He actually winds up splitting, and they wind up getting it. I just thought that was just, I just think it's such a funny little game. Very clever, I think. Okay. So why do we care about this model? Well, we don't care about golden balls. But we do care about oligopolies. So just to refresh, we were working with this set of marginal cost and demand curve, right? Cost curve and demand curve, where marginal cost was 2, right? So we had a constant marginal cost where marginal cost is equal to average total cost. We had a downward sloping demand curve, which indicates we're in a monopolistic type market, not a perfectly competitive market. And if this were run by a monopolist, if this market had only one competitor, they would set their price at the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? So we solved for that. We came up with, well, that would be 4, a price of a quantity of 4 and a price of 6. They would then make this, the monopolist would then make a profit of 16, right? This square up here. We said if a competitor entered the market, they would be tempted to undercut their competitor. That would be their natural inclination. So their natural inclination would be effectively to steal, right? So so firm A is already in the market. Firm B comes in. Firm B would be tempted to cut the price to 5, and then they would get all of the business and A would get nothing, right? And they would get some amount of profit less than 16. It would actually be 15. But then the next round, A would undercut to 4, right? And we ran through this whole thing, and they would wind up here at the competitive outcome, producing 8, right? Which is the competitive outcome where marginal cost equals price. They would wind up, neither one of them would make any excess profits, right? They would be operating where price is equal to average total cost. So they would be making what we called normal profits, but they would not be making excess or abnormal profits, which is what they have over here. So unless they could come to an agreement, what would most likely happen is they would keep undercutting each other until they both wind up with 0, which is kind of what the outcome here is, right? So their goal would be, their ideal would be, hey, we both agree to split the market, and each of us will produce half of the monopoly quantity. So firm A would produce 2 and firm B would produce 2, so that the market quantity would be 4, and then they would split the monopoly profit of 16, right? So that firm A and firm B both wind up getting 8 as opposed to 0, right? Because if they can't coordinate and collude to get this outcome, then they both wind up with 0. So let's draw their outcomes. Oh, and then the one time, right? They could cheat, set a price of 5, and get a quantity of 5, and then they would earn a profit of 15. But they would only be able to do that one time because then they would compete down to 0. So let's draw this, right, as a prisoner's dilemma game. So I'll just put firm A, firm B, right? And we have, let's call it undercut or split. And undercut or split. Okay, so if they undercut and if they both undercut, then we wind up at the competitive outcome where they both get 0 profit. So the outcome there is 0, 0. B gets 0, A gets 0. If B undercuts and A splits, B gets a one-time of 15 and A gets 0, right? So if B undercuts, they come in at a price of 5, they generate a quantity of 5, and they earn 15. But when they do that, the other competitor winds up with nothing. If A undercuts and B splits, B gets 0 and A gets 15. And then if they both split, if they both agree to split and cooperate, then they both cut to 4. They generate the monopoly quantity, and they get this whole big chunk of profit, which is a total of 16 that they split between each other, and so they get 8 each. Okay, so now we have our game set up, and it's identical to the Golden Balls game that we just did. So let's go back over the dominant strategies that they have. So remember, the player on the left gets the left outcomes. The player on top gets the right outcomes. So the player on the left can only choose between 2 strategies. They can choose to undercut or they can choose to split. So we want to compare these 2 outcomes for player B, right? So if they choose undercut, they'll get 0 or 15. If they choose split, they'll get 0 or 8. So the dominant strategy then, because they're indifferent between 0 and 0, they like 15 more than 8. Their dominant strategy is to play undercut. Now comparing the strategies on the right, the outcomes on the right for player A, if they choose undercut, they get 0 or 15. If they choose split, they get 0 or 8. So because 0 and 0 are the same, they don't care about that. But 15 is bigger than 18. So their dominant strategy is to play undercut as well. So without any kind of contract, the most believable outcome is that both of them would attempt to undercut, and they would both wind up competing down to where profit, they'll drop their prices to 2, they'll make 8, and they will wind up with 0 profit. That would be a one-shot game, right? A one-time game. But they're not playing, unlike Abraham and Nick, they're not playing a one-time game, right? They're both playing in the market together, right? Let's say they're, Scorps and Libby's, right? If Libby's cuts its prices on its beers to below what Scorps is charging, then everybody's going to want to run over to Libby's to drink, right? and then what will happen? Well, Scorps will have to cut its prices, and then everybody will run over to Scorps and leave Libby's, and they'll go back and forth until they can't until they're at their marginal cost. And so the clients will be coming in and paying just whatever the cost is to sell beer, right? So they'll be paying right at the minimum cost necessary for the firms to stay in business. So that would be a suboptimal outcome for them. What would be better is if Scorps and Libby's could get together and decide to charge everybody a higher price, right? So if we can imagine, player A is Libby's and player B is Scorps, right? And they're trying to decide how much to charge for beer, then in a one-shot deal, right? In a one-shot game, sorry, not a one-shot deal, but a one-shot game, right? The most likely outcome would be that they would both play undercut. But Scorps and Libby's are going to be next to each other until the end of time, right? So, or until one of them goes out of business, which might happen given our current circumstances. But under normal circumstances, they're just going to be sitting there, right, trying to fill their respective bars each weekend night, using weekend loosely to include Wednesday through Sunday, but trying to fill their bars with young scholars from UNH, and so it's not in their interest to play the undercut in the long run, right? So so if they can find a way to agree to charge a higher price, maybe maybe $6 per beer instead of $2 per beer, right? Then they both wind up making a really nice profit, and during the summer when you all go home, they can take all their profits and go for a vacation wherever they want to go, wherever bar owners go. Probably not Durham. So how do we make this believable? Well, here's the thing. If player A, let's just go with player A. If player A cheats, he gets 15, right? One time, and B gets 0, but that's in round 1. In round 2, B says, "Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, and shame on you." So in the next round, B says, "If you're going to play undercut, I'm going to play undercut." And so they get 0. They both wind up 0. And B is the kind of person that holds a grudge. So let's imagine they just get 0 until the end of time, right? So they, play, "You fooled me once. I'm never going to play that again." So what A winds up getting then is 15. He gets 15 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 on through forever. If instead, right, A plays split and B plays split, they can each get 8 and then 8. And as long as they keep playing split, they can get 8, right, on until the end of time. And so what we have to compare then is, or what we, to try to figure this out, to try to solve this, we have to say, how much is that worth to them? So we're going to assume that these are rational actors, right? They may be nice guys, but they're in business. And so their first and foremost, most important thing is to figure out how to make as much profit as possible. So if cheating and then undercutting and ultimately pricing at marginal cost is the only way to do business, then that's what they'll do. But if they can make more money by cooperating and staying in business, right, then that would be the preferable way to go. So how much is this stream of cash flows worth? If I get 8 forever, how much is that worth? How do I figure that out? And I know most of you are taking finance. I know some of you have not, but most of you are taking finance. So we did this back in chapter 9. If I get a stream of cash flows of the same amount forever, what's that called? Remember? No bells. It's not an annuity. It rhymes with annuity. It's a perpetual payment or come on now. Perpetuity. Thank you, Larkin. It's a perpetuity. Does anybody remember, Larkin or anybody else, remember the formula for calculating the present value of a perpetuity? In other words, what's the value of a perpetuity today? Yes, exactly. It's the payment divided by the interest rate or the discount rate. So in this case, the payment would be 8, right? We're going to get 8 in each period. And then we've got to pick a discount rate. So let's imagine that the discount rate is 5, right? If the discount rate, or 5%, sorry, 5%. So we're dividing 8 divided by 0.05. That's the same thing as multiplying 8 times 20. So 8 times 20 is 160. So the value of this perpetuity down here for each player is 160. So each of them, the value at a 5% discount rate, the value of this perpetuity down here is worth 160. The payoff for cheating is 15. So even though the two players have a dominant strategy to cheat in any one game, right? They know they're going to play a game if this was Scorps and Libby's, every weekend, right? They're going to play this game every weekend. And so if one of them cheats and steals all the business by cutting the price of their beers, then the other one is going to also cheat. And as a result, they wind up in the bad corner where they're both losing money, right? No, they're not losing money, but they're not making any excess profits. So when they consider cheating, what is running in their heads is, if I cheat, I get a big payoff the day that I cheat, but after that, my competitor isn't going to believe me, and we're going to fall to this bad equilibrium, the undercut equilibrium, and we wind up with I get this one-time payoff of 15, but I am sacrificing 160, right? So it becomes believable if I say, if I was the owner of Libby's and the owner of Scorps was standing out on out on the sidewalk, and I was like, hey, Bubba, I promise not to cut my beer prices if you don't cut your beer prices. And, the Scorps owner says, all right, well, I'm going to price my beer at 6. And I'll say, I'll price my beer at 6. And we don't even have to have a handshake on it. We just both price our beers at 6, and we leave it at 6 because that way we both get 8 each weekend, right? We get 8 in profits each weekend if we agree to do that. And as we go forward, if we both have the same discount rate going forward, it would be worth 160 to us. So it becomes believable, the promise, even if it's not enforceable, like I can't take him to court, right? If I went to New Hampshire District Court and I said, I was the owner of Libby's and Andre was the owner of Scorps, right? And I said to the judge, I talked to Andre and he said that he would price his beers at 6 if I priced my beers at 6, but then he priced his beers at 5. And I want you to, make him pay me some, the amount that he cheated me out of. The judge would put both of us in jail because what we were doing is antitrust, right? Is businesses are not allowed to talk to each other about pricing. That violates antitrust laws. Now, this is small town stuff, and it wouldn't generate a lot of interest by a judge, right? But it is illegal, right? It is in fact illegal for the owners of Scorps and Libby's to talk to each other and set their prices, to collude on their prices. It's illegal in the United States to do that. But that said, one way they could do it is because they know this is true, right? Because they know that they want a price here, the owner of Scorps could write down the price of the beers that he's planning to sell and put it on a chalkboard and put it out in front of his bar. And the owner of Libby's would see it and be like, okay, I'll just charge the same price, whatever that is. Or it's easy enough for him to ask, one of the students that's, the owner of Libby's to ask one of the students that's in the bar, hey, how much is Scorps charging for beers? More likely, if Scorps cut their prices, you all would tell the owner of Scorps or Libby's right away, hey, next door is selling their beer for less. Unless you cut your prices, we're going to go next door. So they don't even really have to talk to each other. They can signal to each other in different ways. And businesses actually do this, right? And the smaller the number of businesses, the easier it is to engage in this sort of tacit collusion. That's what it's called, tacit collusion, meaning the two owners, like Andre and I, are as owners of Scorps and Libby's, don't actually have to have a sit down. We don't ever have to talk to each other. We can just observe what the other is doing, and we can know whether one or the other is cheating. And as long as Andre is in split mode and charging $6 a beer, I will stay in split mode and charge $6 a beer, and we will both make money. But if Andre cuts his prices, I'm going to cut my prices, and we're going to go up here, and we both are worse off. So what you want to do when you are thinking about this kind of outcome is, if it is a one-time game, a one-shot game, then the dominant strategies are going to dominate. But if it is a repeated game, which is what this is, we're going to play it over and over and over again, then you're going to want to take the present value of the payments that you can get from cooperating and compare them to the benefit that you could get from cheating, assuming that you would cheat and only get your cheating payment one time. So let's use Abraham and Nick again. If Abraham and Nick were going to engage in, if they were going to play that game over and over and over again, right, the cooperating strategy would get them 6,800, and the cheating strategy would get them 13,600. The problem is that you only get the 13,600 one time, and then after that you get 0. With the cooperating strategy, you would get 6,800, the payment, divided by the interest rate. So remember, the present value of a perpetuity is equal to the payment divided by the interest rate or the discount rate. So let's assume that Abraham and Nick have a 10% discount rate, a 10% interest rate. 6,800 divided by 10% is what? It's the same thing as multiplying 6,800 by right. It's going to be the same. It's the same. Dividing by 10% or 0.1 is the same thing as multiplying by 10. So the value of cooperating is 6,800 divided by 0.1. The value of cheating is 13,600. So the cooperative strategy dominates the cheating strategy in a repeating game if the interest rate is low enough. If you have a really, really high interest rate, then it's not going to dominate, right? So if we had, say, a interest rate of like 90%, then you'd be dividing 6,800 by 0.9, which would be 6,800 divided by 0.9 would get you 75. So in that case, if you have a really high discount rate, then the cooperative strategy, even if it's repeated, the cooperative strategy wouldn't dominate the cheating strategy. So in this case, I want to say it's, yeah. If you had a discount rate less than 50% per period, then the cooperative strategy would dominate. So if you had a cooperative, a discount rate of say 25% even, which is really high, right? You'd still have your payoff would be worth 27,000. So this is one way that a prisoner's dilemma type situation can be solved, is by ensuring that you have repeated playing, right? You're going to play over and over and over again. This is called a prisoner's dilemma, right? This game is called a prisoner's dilemma because the original kind of formulation was, imagine two criminals are arrested after, pulling a bank heist, and they're put in separate rooms, and they're told, you can either, if you squeal, right? If you tell the truth about the crime, then we'll let you go, and we'll punish your friend really hard. And we're also, by the way, offering the same deal to your friend in the other room right now. So you have this right, squeal or quiet, right? So do you tell or don't you tell? So criminal 1, criminal 2, right? And they both are being offered the same deal. If you squeal, you'll do no time. But if you're quiet, then and your friend squeals, then you'll go to jail. If you both squeal, then you'll both go to jail because your testimony is not worth anything. So it's incumbent that you both that either that what you really want is for you to squeal and your buddy to stay quiet. If you both squeal, you'll both go away for say 3 years, so -3, right? If you're both quiet, then they can't solve the crime, so it's 0-0. But if you if you're quiet and your buddy squeals, then you go away for -6 and he goes away for 0. And if you squeal, you don't. If criminal 2 squeals and criminal 1 doesn't squeal, then he goes away for 6 years. So in this case, what you want is the low outcome. Rather the higher outcome, I guess, which is 0, is bigger than -6. So let's look at the strategies again. So comparing for criminal 1, you're going to compare column to column. So -3 versus -6. Well, -3 is better. 0 and 0, you're indifferent. So your dominant strategy as criminal 1 is to squeal. And then comparing vertically, criminal two's payoffs are -3 and 0. So -3 versus -6. Well, I'd rather go to jail for 3 years than 6 years. And then I'm indifferent between 0 and 0. So my dominant strategy is to squeal. And if both squeal, then they both go away for 3 years. So that's how this gets the name, the prisoner's dilemma, is the idea that you're doing this interrogation simultaneously and separately. Now, why is it that that a lot of criminals wind up with a 0-0 outcome? Why would that be? I mean, why is it that criminals, when presented with the prisoner's dilemma, sometimes stay quiet and don't rat out their buddies? They ain't a snitch. Good. But why ain't they a snitch? Why is that a bad thing, right? They're criminals.
Because they'll probably, get snipped from the
What?
ground. They get put on the
What?
ground snitch.
They'll get what?
They'll be put on the ground if they snitch. Snitches get stitches, end up in ditches.
That sounds like you're a little too familiar with that there, Andre. They're partners. Okay. No, Andre, I think you're onto something, right? So there's what you're describing is an external punishment, right? So if you squeal and your buddy goes to jail and you go back to the hood or to the gang's going to be like, the gang's going to know, right? You squealed, your testimony got used against criminal one, and now criminal one's going to jail for 6 years. And so we're going to punish you, right? So there's a couple of things that can happen. One is you're actually part of a larger society of criminals, and the larger society of criminals enforces this value of quiet, right? We don't cooperate. Snitches get stitches, right? As Andre said, snitches get stitches is a threat, not necessarily from the other criminal who's now in jail for 6 years, but from the larger criminal community that you are a part of. So communal enforcement is an important piece of this. So this is actually a thing like what's going on now, right? So I went to the grocery store the other day, yesterday, and I was wearing my mask and I'm trying to stay far away from people. And I'm looking around and probably about half the people in Hannaford are wearing masks and doing their best to stay away from each other. And then there's a bunch of idiots that are running around acting like nothing's going on. They're not wearing masks. They're walking up too closely to people, right? And so people are starting to give them dirty looks. And sooner or later, we're going to engage in some sort of enforcement as a community against people that behave like that. So from a public health perspective, this same kind of thing applies, right? I'd rather not wear a mask. I'd rather just do whatever I feel like doing. But that winds up getting me, right, a low payoff, and the community a big negative if I say get the disease and start passing it around. So so the community is likely to engage in punishment tactics. People will talk badly about me, things like that. So that's one way of thinking about this. Ariana said, "Oh, they're partners." So if that's the case, then they're expecting to, like the example we were working just a second ago, right? Talking about Scorps and Libby's, they don't even have to like each other. They just have to know that they're going to keep playing this game over and over again. And so they know if they, okay, I go up for 6 years, but when I come back, I won't trust you anymore. And so I won't work with you anymore. And so now you go to 0. We both wind up, not getting any to pull any more jobs. So so 2 ways to solve a prisoner's dilemma. One is in particular that we've focused on is repeat games, right? Repeat games allow for you to coordinate on this rather than the dominant strategies. They allow you to coordinate on a better outcome. But but you can also find community enforcement where the game is not happening in a vacuum. The game is happening where criminals 3 through 10 are watching the game and watching the outcome. And if you do not go with the preferred criminal outcome of staying quiet, then you're going to get stitches and wind up in ditches, as Andre said. Okay. So but even without external enforcement, right? Again, because we're playing a repeat game, right? The cooperative strategy is actually worth more in the long run. And so we don't even have to we don't need external enforcement. We don't need a contract. It's just in our best interests to cooperate. And so we actually see this in the real world. Like I said, I know some of you are not of age, and I guess most of you are not around right now. So, but when you come back next year and you go, and you go downtown to Scorps and Libby's, what you're going to see is the prices of the drinks are about the same, plus or minus. I've never been in Scorps, but they might be slightly less depending on how nice the place is or whatever. But adjusting for other factors, the price of the drinks is going to be about the same because the owners know they're in this repeat game together, and it behooves them to cooperate, even if their agreement to cooperate is only a tacit agreement that is the result of them being able to observe what the other participants are doing. Now, when does this work and when doesn't it work? Well, it works best when there is repeat opportunities, when there are relatively few players. When there's lots of players, it becomes harder to coordinate the cooperation versus cheating because it becomes harder to observe. And then other people, individual players have different discount rates. So when do cartels, right? So this would, like Libby's and Scorps is kind of a cartel. When do cartels work? Well, they work, like I said, when there's relatively few of them, right? So, and that's usually because they have control over a key resource. So an example of that is, say, diamonds, right? Most diamonds come from parts of Africa. Uranium also comes from Africa, right? These are things that are relatively rare. Things that are not rare, iron, coal, these are not rare. They come all over the place. Things that are artificially rare are physicians, nurses, right? And so you could look at the licensing regime in each state for physicians and nurses and other professionals. Professional licensing in general is a way of reducing the supply and controlling supply and ensuring that there's a limited number of participants in the market and allowing them to keep prices high and quantity low. So one of the ways that this is directly relevant to healthcare is through professional licensing. Right. We make it hard for people to get a physician's license or a nurse's license. It used to be pretty common to have 2-year RNs, right? You'd go get an associate's degree and you'd start working as an RN. Nurses associations are pushing for 4-year RNs, and even now master's degree RNs. We're seeing this in a lot of fields like occupational therapy and physical therapy, that the entry-level degree has moved over the years. Used to be when I was younger, much younger, you could become a physical therapist with a 4-year degree. Now it's a minimum of a 6-year degree, and they're moving towards a 7-year degree. And that's also true for physical therapy. The entry level eventually, right now, the entry level is a 6-year master's degree. They're moving towards a 7-year doctor of occupational therapy degree. What does that do? Well, that limits the number of occupational therapists that are in the market, right? OT, PT. My wife is a CPA. Used to be you could do, I think you now have to have, in many states, you now have to have a master's in accounting in order to qualify to take the CPA exam. It's all about limiting the number of participants so that they can drive up price by limiting supply. Another way that you can create a sustainable cartel is if you have economies of scale. And what that means is you need large scale to be efficient, right? So examples of that in your book are car manufacturers, right? If you want to sell, family sedans or family SUVs or whatever, you have to have a really big factory so you can drive down the price. The cost of entering and becoming a car manufacturer is really, really high. And so they have economies of scale. It requires a big investment so you can make a lot of stuff at relatively low costs. One reason that hospitals are consolidating is because of economies of scale. In particular, it's very costly to have a electronic health record, right? To get an electronic health record installed is extremely expensive. It's in the millions of dollars. And so if you're a tiny little hospital, it's really hard to do that. You can't afford it. So what we're seeing is hospitals coming together and trying to take advantage of economies of scale. As a result, we're seeing a gradual decrease in the number of freestanding hospitals and an increasing number of hospital systems who will then be able to reduce quantity and increase prices. Another example where cartels work is when we have network effects. And you guys are a network generation. You grew up probably, you probably got your first Facebook account when you were, 12 or something, I'm guessing. Facebook, the reason that there is only, there's one Facebook and there aren't dozens of them is because of network effects, right? What's the value? And I know Facebook, me talking about Facebook makes me sound like an old. So, we could talk about Instagram, right? Facebook is an example, even though Facebook owns Instagram. I don't know, some of the other cool ones out there now, TikTok, right? That's a little less of an interactive one. I don't know what else is hot, but Facebook and Instagram in particular, right? So I've been a Flickr user for years because I'm a big photographer. Flickr is kind of dying, though. I've been using Flickr for probably 10 years, and Flickr is kind of dying because everybody's moving over to Instagram. So and that's a good demonstration of network effects. Where do you want to be if you want to share pictures, right? Where do you want to be? Well, you want to be where other people are sharing pictures and other people want to look at pictures. Well, it used to be if you wanted to share pictures and look at pictures, you'd go to Flickr. Now everybody's on Instagram. And so people are moving from Flickr to Instagram. because there's value in having more people on in your network. So the more people there are in your network, the more valuable your network becomes. And so it's hard. So when there are significant network effects, it tends to decrease the number of competitors because people will all want to be where everybody else is, right? And so social media works, is big on network effects. Finally, government barriers, right? So government barriers, we just talked about, really probably the occupational licensing really belongs in here more specifically because it is a government-run, government-created cartel. Occupational licensing. I mean, it's a good demonstration of what I was talking about, which is control over a resource. So they both kind of government occupational licensing is an artificial is an artificial way of creating a shortage. There used to be these things called taxis before there was Uber. I know maybe you've seen them. In New York City, and it's common in other, I don't know how Boston operates, but in New York City is famous. There were a limited number of what are called taxi medallions. And a taxi medallion is a thing that you have to have if you want to be a taxi in New York City, you have to have a taxi medallion. There are, I think, 30,000 of them, and that's it. So there can only be 30,000 taxis in New York City. As before Uber took off, so whenever that was, like 2009 or so, or 10, a taxi medallion was sold for $1 million, right? Why was it so valuable? Because if you had a taxi medallion, you didn't have to compete with, there were a limited number of taxis, and you could make a ton of money by overcharging people for rides. But once Uber came in, kind of did an end run around the taxi medallions. The value of taxi medallions fell from $1 million to, I don't know, it's something really small now, like $50,000. So if you bought a taxi medallion for $1 million, which people really were, as late as 2010, that the value of those taxi medallions has now fallen to a really small number. I mean, they're still out there, but it's just not. Uber has really undercut them. So sometimes government barriers work, sometimes they don't. In finance, we've talked about rating agencies. So we've talked about bonds and how bonds get these ratings either from Standard & Poor's or Moody's. There's, I think, like 2 other rating agencies. They have to, the rating agencies have to be approved by the federal government, and the federal government's only approved 4 of them. I want to say it's 4, and so there is a government barrier, right? So there's a cartel for rating agencies, and so they can charge a really high price. Okay, so there's a couple of other things in the text. About price match game, you should read that. That's relevant, as well as, one thing I want to show you, I want to make a point, is with the prisoner's dilemma, I showed you a mirror game, right, where the payoffs were the same for both players. That doesn't have to be true, right? So if we have player A over here and player B over here, and let's just say they're going to choose between high and low. If A chooses high and B chooses high, let's say their payoffs are 5 or 10. If A chooses high and B chooses low, then A gets 10 and B gets 7. If and then we'll set it up as 2 and 20, 1 and 3. And so A's payoffs are always kind of lower than B's payoffs, but they're structured in such a way that we still get a dominant strategy of high, high. And so this might be a bad outcome. You know, high might be a bad outcome. So maybe you want a low outcome. But if we looked at B's strategy, so you have 10 and 20 versus 7 and 3. Let's assume, okay, let's assume they want a low outcome. You'd rather have, if you want a low outcome, you'd rather have 7 than 10. You'd rather have 3 than 20. So you're going to choose low, low. And if you are player A, you're going to compare 5 and 10 versus 2 and 1. So you'd rather have low, low. And so we settle on this, right? My point here being, we didn't have mirrored outcomes. It can still work. The outcomes don't have to necessarily be, there doesn't have to necessarily be a solution either. Right? So it could be that you don't have a solution. So if we change the game a bit, right? Let's say we have player B, player A, high, low again. Let's say the payoffs look like this time. So now we try to compare across. If we're shooting for the low outcome, looking at B's outcomes, he's comparing 10 versus 3. Well, he'd rather have high because 3 is lower than 10. But here 7 is less than 20, so he'd rather have low. So he doesn't have a dominant strategy. Also, if we go up, down, right, we get 5 and 2. Well, 1 is less than 5, but 2 is less than 10. So A doesn't have a dominant strategy either. So there is no dominant solution for this particular game. All right, that's good enough for chapter 15. Hope you liked the video. I'll post that so you can show your friends and amaze your friends and family. Any questions? Okay, so the homework for 15 will be due, what's today? Today's Wednesday, so Monday. And we will move on to the next chapter, which I'm not sure if we're doing 16 or so. Check the syllabus, check the updated syllabus. We'll be moving on to the next chapter for next time. All right, have a great night. I'll hang out for a couple of minutes. If you guys have any questions or concerns for me.